Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine a world where the biggest breakthroughs weren't meticulously planned out, where the most successful businesses seemed to, well, stumble into their fortunes, and where the deepest learning happened far outside the confines of a traditional classroom.
Right.
Sounds a bit chaotic, right? Like letting the dice roll and hoping for the best.
Yeah, a little bit unstructured maybe.
But what if that seeming chaos is precisely where the true magic, the real innovation, and the most robust success actually reside?
What's truly fascinating here, with these sources we're looking at systematically dissect, is the illusion of control.
Ah,
They demonstrate with some really compelling evidence that many complex systems, be they scientific discovery, economic markets, or even individual learning, don't just tolerate unpredictability, they actually thrive on it.
thrive on it, not just survive it.
Exactly, which raises an incredibly important question for all of us. If our best laid plans often fail, or even more provocatively, if they actively prevent optimal outcomes, what then does genuine success actually look like?
That's the core question guiding our deep dive today. Our mission is to extract the most potent nuggets of knowledge from this incredibly rich collection of insights. Insights that profoundly challenge our conventional wisdom about how progress is made, how we innovate, and indeed how we even educate ourselves and others.
Mhm.
We're going to help you rethink your entire approach to problem solving, to pursuing new ventures, and to your own journey of acquiring knowledge. Get ready to understand why sometimes the very best way to find exactly what you're looking for is to be profoundly open to finding something else entirely.
Indeed, we'll be exploring a powerful concept: the inherent robustness and often explosive benefits that arise from seemingly irrational or unplanned approaches.
Mhm.
These are outcomes that rigid, goal-driven systems, what our sources call teleological approaches, consistently overlook or actively suppress. It's about cultivating an appreciation for the profound, often hidden power of the unexpected.
So let's dive straight into what our sources term the illusion of intent. For most of us, our entire lives, from school to career, have been structured around planning, setting clear objectives, following a predefined path, you know?
Absolutely, that's the standard model.
We're taught to be teleological in our thinking, meaning everything is driven by a specific, predetermined end goal. But the argument here is that for large entities, whether they're governments or massive corporations, this very mindset can become their biggest obstacle.
That's a crucial distinction.
Yeah.
The core idea is that while government spending on research certainly yields immense payoffs, these rarely manifest in the way they were originally conceived or intended.
Okay.
The sources are quite radical in advocating for non-teleological thinking, essentially. Research driven by exploration and emergent possibilities, rather than by a strict, predefined outcome.
So not goal-driven, more like wandering.
Kind of, yeah, it's a complete inversion of how most large-scale research initiatives are currently structured.
And the most iconic example, which is cited repeatedly, is the internet itself.
Oh, absolutely.
It's an absolutely monumental payoff, a global infrastructure that has fundamentally reshaped human existence. But it wasn't designed to be the interconnected, pervasive information superhighway we know today, was it?
Not at all. Its origins lie in military expenditures, specifically the ARPANET project,
Right, ARPANET.
which aimed to create a robust communication network that could withstand attacks and ensure continuity of command in a, Cold War scenario.
Makes sense for the time.
Yeah. The Internet's eventual global role as a commercial and social platform was an unforeseen byproduct, an accidental triumph that far eclipsed its original design or purpose. It emerged from an initial seed, then organically evolved into something entirely different.
So it sounds like the original project laid the groundwork, but the real value came from a surprising, unplanned drift.
That's it exactly. Drift.
And this pattern isn't exclusive to the internet. The sources suggest many significant medical advances follow a similar trajectory.
Exactly. Take some of the most life-saving medical breakthroughs. Many weren't the direct result of a targeted research program aiming for that specific cure.
Really, like they weren't even looking for that.
Often, no. They were often serendipitous discoveries, happy accidents, or insights that branched off from entirely unrelated investigations. This points to a systemic issue where large bureaucratic entities, governments, large corporations, are inherently too teleological in their approach. Their rigid focus on predefined outcomes makes them profoundly option blind.
Option blind. That's a powerful phrase. It suggests that by focusing too narrowly on a specific target, they literally cannot see the other valuable opportunities that emerge from unexpected directions,
Right.
even if those opportunities are far more lucrative or impactful.
Precisely. This option blindness is presented as a fundamental flaw, particularly damaging to large corporations, including the titans of big pharma.
You mean they're their own worst enemies?
In a way, yes. Their plan-driven nature, their adherence to a predetermined strategic script, locks them into non-opportunistic courses of action. They effectively become their own worst enemies by trying to force a linear path in a nonlinear world rather than being adaptable and capitalizing on emerging possibilities. They lose the ability to milk the option, which is a crucial concept we'll definitely explore more.
It's almost like they're trying to force the river to flow in a perfectly straight, pre-dug channel when nature intends it to meander, to carve new paths, and to find new fertile ground.
That's a great analogy.
So if this rigid planning is so detrimental, what's the radical alternative our sources present for fostering true innovation?
The alternative is what's elegantly termed blue sky research.
Blue sky research, okay.
This isn't about funding specific projects with meticulously predefined goals and deliverables. Instead, you fund people.
Fund the people, not the project plan.
Exactly. You spread small amounts of funding across a large number of researchers, essentially making numerous small bets on individuals. The philosophy is to trust the intellectual curiosity and adaptive capabilities of gifted minds, rather than dictating their every step.
Ah, the classic bet on the jockey, not on the horse philosophy.
Yeah, you got it.
This instantly brings to mind the observations of sociologist Steve Chapin, who studied venture capitalists in California. He noted that these investors, often celebrated for their shrewdness, tended to back entrepreneurs, not just their carefully constructed ideas or business plans.
That's a perfect connection. Chapin discovered that many significant VC decisions were made with surprisingly little reliance on formal business plans.
Really? No business plan.
Or at least any detailed analysis, if it happened, was usually backup, confirmatory in nature, created after the initial decision to invest in the individual. The author's own experience with VCs confirmed this pattern. Money flows to the tinkerers. Those individuals trusted to be intellectually nimble enough to milk the option, to pivot, adapt, and capitalize on opportunities as they emerged, regardless of the initial plan.
So innovation isn't about following a predetermined map. It's about a kind of intelligent drift.
Drift, exactly.
Success, then, requires what our sources charmingly call flanner-like abilities, the capacity to wander, to observe acutely, to be open to incidental discoveries, and to capture opportunities as they arise, rather than being confined by a bureaucratic, strategic mold.
Right. It's about creating an environment where discovery can happen organically, not dictating its exact form.
Like cultivating a garden rather than building a machine.
That is precisely the core message. You cultivate the conditions for serendipity and emergent success, rather than attempting to engineer it through a top-down, strictly planned approach. This concept, the power of allowing for the unexpected, is a fundamental recurring theme woven throughout all our sources. It suggests that control can be the enemy of genuine progress.
Which brings us beautifully to serendipity itself, not just a happy accident, but a quantifiable hidden engine of discovery and progress. Our sources make a strong statistical argument for how payoffs from research actually work, and it's probably not what most of us have been taught.
Indeed. The argument is that payoffs from research, especially in areas characterized by true innovation, follow what's known as a power law type of statistical distribution.
Okay, power law. What does that mean in simple terms?
Okay, so imagine a typical bell curve where most outcomes cluster around an average. A power law is radically different. Instead of a lot of average outcomes, you have a few extremely large outcomes and many, many small or even zero outcomes. Think like book sales or city sizes.
Right, a few massive bestsellers, lots of books barely sell.
Exactly. So this means there are big, near unlimited upsides from successful ventures, but crucially, due to the inherent optionality, the downside is limited. You can only lose your initial small investment, but the potential gain from a breakthrough is uncapped and explosive.
So, for a power law, it's not about the average. It's about the outliers, the rare, massive wins that pull the whole average way, way up.
That's the essence of it.
And this implies that the payoff should be linear to the number of trials, not total funds involved. You're saying it's fundamentally more effective to make many small bets than a few large, heavily funded ones.
Precisely. In this type of distribution, the single winner will have an explosive, uncapped payoff. Therefore, The right approach is what the sources advocate as blind funding or dividend by end style.
Dividend by N, okay.
This means spreading small amounts per trial across a very large number of trials. Think of it like a venture capitalist insight that's quoted. The payoff can be so large that you can't afford not to be in everything.
Wow.
In what our sources call extremistan, a domain where extreme, rare events dominate outcomes, it's more important to be something in a small amount than to miss it. Because missing that one big hit means missing almost all the return.
That's a fundamentally different way to think about investment and risk. It completely flips the traditional risk-averse model on its head.
It really does.
And the sources argue that this applies strongly to medicine, claiming it has a long history of domestication of luck.
It absolutely does. While sectors like technology have, perhaps more instinctively, embraced randomness and iterative development, medicine has only relatively recently begun to acknowledge and, to some extent, accept randomness in its practice.
But the history shows.
Yes, when you look at the historical data, it consistently reveals the overwhelming power of chance in medical breakthroughs. It's often been about recognizing and capitalizing on accidental observations.
And the National Cancer Institute provides a truly stark, almost damning illustration of this. Think back to Nixon's war on cancer in the early 1970s.
Right, a huge initiative.
This was a massive, concentrated, and very expensive effort by the NCI to find plant-based anti-cancer drugs. Over 20 years, they screened an astonishing 144,000 plant extracts from 15,000 different species. What was the result of all that highly focused teleological effort?
It's pretty shocking. Despite the immense resources and duration, not a single plant-based anti-cancer drug from that monumental screening effort ever reached approval status.
Not one, after screening 144,000.
Not one. This stands in stark contrast to discoveries like the vinca alkaloid, a major group of plant-derived cancer drugs, which emerged purely by chance in the late 1950s, not through direct targeted research. It was a serendipitous observation.
So there's this profound gap between perception, the idea that we can plan our way to a cure, and reality, where chance seems to play an outsized role.
It seems so. An insider, John LaMarina, observed that private industry develops 9 drugs out of 10. And even of the 46 drugs with significant sales that the NIH looked at, only about 3 had anything to do with federal funding. It paints a picture where the planned governmental efforts often miss the mark.
So the big government pushes aren't necessarily yielding the results we think.
That seems to be the argument here, yes. And the sources repeatedly highlight that cures for cancer and many other ailments have often come from other branches of research entirely.
Like looking for one thing, finding another.
Exactly. You might be searching for, say, non-cancer drugs for a completely different purpose. And in the process, you stumble upon something you are not looking for at all, something with powerful anti-cancer properties. The most famous example given is a drug you probably know as Viagra.
Right.
Its initial research name was Vogue drug Antio, and it was discovered entirely by chance while researching a treatment for high blood pressure and angina. Not what they set out to find.
And there's this interesting academic bias mentioned too. The sources suggest that when a significant result is initially discovered by an academic researcher through unexpected means, they're often likely to disregard its consequences because it's not what they wanted to find. They have a script to follow, a hypothesis to prove, and anything outside that rigid framework is seen as noise, not signal.
It powerfully reinforces the idea that all scientific research and discoveries are mostly out of chance, not by properly aided institutes or by government central-funded institutes. Morton Mayer's book, The Wonderful Happy Accident, Serendipity in Modern Medical Breakthroughs, is explicitly cited as highlighting this very point.
And they fake the story later.
Well, the sources suggest that discoveries are often ex post narrated back to some academic research, creating a neat, linear story that contributes to our collective illusion of planned success, obscuring the true role of chance.
Now, if you want a truly dramatic, almost unbelievable example of serendipity in medicine, the origins of chemotherapy are absolutely mind-blowing.
Oh yeah, the Bari incident.
Our sources describe a specific incident. An American ship carrying mustard gas was bombed by Germans in Bari, Italy in 1942 during World War II.
Yes, and the critical detail here is the effect of that mustard gas exposure on soldiers who also happen to have liquid cancer lymphoma.
Oh.
Doctors observed that the gas had an unexpected and profound impact on the rapidly dividing cancer cells. This accidental observation, emerging from a wartime tragedy, unexpectedly led directly to the development of chemotherapy as a treatment for cancer.
From mustard gas exposure.
Yes. However, because mustard gas was banned by the Geneva Convention, this origin story was largely kept secret. Churchill famously purged all mentions from UK records, and information was deliberately stifled in the US for years, even as researchers secretly continued to develop nitrogen mustard-based treatments.
That's a powerful, almost morally ambiguous illustration of how critical breakthroughs can arise from deeply unpredictable and even horrific origins, and
Absolutely.
how the desire for a clean, linear narrative, or perhaps to bury uncomfortable truths, might actively obscure or suppress these happy accidents. It truly shows how the official history can often be a sanitized version of messy, accidental progress.
It perfectly demonstrates the ex post facto narration problem, creating an illusion of planned success where none existed. And it's a stark reminder that official histories often obscure the true, messy, and often random role of chance in human progress.
And this idea extends to the broader therapeutic revolution of the post-war years, a period that saw a large number of effective therapies emerge. James Fanu, a respected doctor and writer, argued that this revolution was not ignited by a major scientific insight. That's quite a claim.
He argued it came from the exact opposite. A profound realization by doctors and scientists that it wasn't necessary to understand in any detail what was wrong at a fundamental level.
They didn't need to know why it worked.
Not in detail, no. Instead, they recognized that synthetic chemistry blindly and randomly would deliver the remedies that had eluded doctors for centuries. They simply started systematically, almost randomly, creating new compounds and observing their effects. The identification of sulfonamides by Gerhard Domack is cited as a prime example of this blind discovery leading to powerful new drugs.
This is truly counterintuitive. The sources make a provocative claim. The increase in our theoretical understanding came with a decrease in the number of new drugs.
Right. It's almost like the more we think we know, the less we discover.
How can that be?
It's a compelling paradox. This counterintuitive point is supported by observations like the stalling of medical cures of the past 2 decades in the face of growing research expenditures. The argument is that an increase in theoretical understanding, while valuable in itself, can sometimes lead to an over-reliance on rational design and hypothesis-driven research,
Which sounds good.
which paradoxically inhibits the random exploration that generates true breakthroughs in complex domains. The analogy given is perfect. Studying the chemical composition of ingredients will make you neither a better cook nor an expert tester. It might even make you worse at both.
Oh, okay, I get that.
The implication is that knowledge in complex domains inhibits research by narrowing our focus and making us option blind.
And this brings us to the future of designer drugs. While the idea of drugs specifically designed to target a known mechanism sounds ideal, the sources note that they are too few compared to the vast number of serendipitous discoveries.
Right. Serendipity still seems to win out overall.
The main property of designer drugs is, by definition, that they are designed, but what's the major inherent problem with them?
The primary problem arises from their potential side effects and, crucially, their interactions with other drugs.
Drug interactions, yeah.
The more drugs that are introduced into the market, the exponentially swelling number of possible interactions between them. Think about it. If you have 20 unrelated drugs, the 21st drug you introduce needs to consider its potential interactions with those 20. But if you have 1,000 different drugs,
Oh, wow.
the 1,001st drug needs to consider nearly 1,000 possible interactions. And in reality, there are tens of thousands of drugs prescribed daily.
Wow. And the source mentions concerning research showing we may be underestimating the interaction of current drugs by a factor of 4.
A factor of 4? That's a terrifying prospect.
Yeah. This suggests the pool of available drugs should be shrinking rather than growing if we are to truly understand and mitigate risks.
It's a profound implication. We simply lack comprehensive long-term clinical studies of drug interactions, especially for combinations that aren't explicitly tested. This means our understanding of how these meticulously designed compounds behave in the incredibly complex human system, particularly in combination with other medications, is severely limited. It adds another powerful layer to the argument that design isn't always superior to allowing for the unexpected, or at least understanding the limits of our design knowledge.
Moving beyond science and medicine, let's look at the power of unplanned evolution in business and broader society. Our sources highlight that success in business often comes not from sticking rigidly to an original plan, but from drift. A product or an entire company finding new applications, new markets, or new purposes entirely unintended by its creators. This phenomenon is called obliquity.
And the historical examples are truly fascinating, almost unbelievable, illustrating how real-world things are very complex and simply don't fit into neat teleological plans. Take Coca-Cola.
Started as medicine, right?
Exactly. Began as a pharmaceutical product, a patent medicine.
Oh.
Or Tiffany and Company, the luxury jewelry icon, which started as a stationery and fancy goods store.
And it gets even wilder. Raytheon, a giant in defense technology and missile guidance systems,
Yeah.
actually started out making refrigerators.
No way. Refrigerators to missiles.
Yep. Nokia, for years the top mobile phone manufacturer globally, began its life as a paper mill.
A paper mill. Okay, that's a jump.
DuPont, famous for groundbreaking materials like Teflon and Kevlar, started as an explosives company. And Avon, the cosmetic sales giant, originally sold books door to door.
Book sales to makeup. Wow.
My personal favorite, Oneida Silversmiths, which started as a highly unorthodox religious cult and became a joint stock company primarily for regulatory reasons to manage its communal property.
A religious cult to silverware.
Yeah.
Okay, these are not small pivots.
Not at all. These aren't just quirky historical footnotes. They demonstrate that the most robust and successful outcomes often arise when entities are sufficiently adaptable and opportunistic to drift into new, unforeseen opportunities. It's a testament to evolutionary adaptation over rigid strategic planning.
It really is.
And it's not just entire companies. Individual products often display this obliquity. Aspirin, for instance, has changed its primary uses many times over its history.
Right, from pain relief to heart health.
Exactly. Or consider Judah Folkman's angiogenesis inhibitors, which were initially intended to restrict blood supply to tumors in cancer treatment, but unexpectedly led to a breakthrough treatment for macular degeneration, a completely different condition.
Yes, even the vinca alkaloid in chemotherapy, mentioned earlier, proved far more effective and useful in contexts beyond its initial chance discovery. It's all about finding unexpected value, realizing that the real utility of something might be completely different from its original intended purpose.
This concept of drift and unexpected outcomes connects beautifully to a broader philosophical idea that our sources discuss. The absence of a central planner doesn't automatically lead to chaos.
Right, it's non-anarchy.
Instead, it often leads to a more effective, self-organizing collaboration guided by what they call an invisible hand, where not a single one knows how to produce it on its own.
This has deep philosophical roots. It connects back to Al-Ghazali's metaphor of a pin, often falsely attributed to Adam Smith later.
The pin metaphor.
The idea is that 25 different persons might be involved in the production of a simple pin, yet not a single one knows how to produce it on its own. It's about recognizing that knowledge isn't centrally held by any single human mind, but emerges from the decentralized interaction of many, almost as if it resides in nature or in a higher power.
Like emergence.
Exactly. Adam Smith's law of markets and modern self-organization theories are directly invoked here, both pointing to emergent order from distributed actions.
That's a profound statement. Not a single individual has a clue about general process. So, if nobody these days is in direct communication with God, meaning we can't foresee or control these complex interactions, then there's little practical difference between the concept of God and opacity, the vast unknown.
Right, the unknown, the unpredictable.
It re-emphasizes that not a single individual has a clue about general process in complex systems.
Exactly. The implication is that this collective, undirected collaboration has an explosive upside.
Explosive, how so?
The sources argue that the core difference between humans and animals lies in our ability to collaborate, engage in business, and copulate all forms of complex, often unplanned interaction. This collaboration leads to a superadditive function. 1 + 1 equals more than 2.
Right, energy.
And 1 + 1 equals much, much more than 3. This is pure nonlinearity with explosive benefits, where the whole is far greater than the sum of its parts.
Which, if you think about it, means we can't truly forecast the world, can we?
Pretty much impossible, yeah.
If you cannot forecast collaborations and cannot direct them, then by definition, you cannot see where the world is going. All those strategic plans and predictions might just be comforting fictions.
Precisely. The only truly effective approach is to create an environment that facilitates these collaborations and lay the foundation for prosperity. The sources are quite blunt about the historical evidence. No, you cannot centralize innovation.
And they point to.
We tried that in Russia remarkably. The failures of centrally planned economies serve as a powerful, real-world testament to this principle.
So it's the invisible hand of the market, as described by Adam Smith, meeting Al-Ghazali's God, both representing these hidden, decentralized forces that drive progress and create wealth far more effectively than any top-down command and control
A
structure.
nice synthesis of ancient wisdom and economic theory.
And the skepticism of centralized planning also extends to expert knowledge itself.
Indeed. Historically, much of the most insightful skepticism has been directed not at abstract entities like God, but squarely at human theories, human constructs, and the pronouncements of expert knowledge.
So skepticism of the experts, not of the divine.
Often, yes. Many great skeptics throughout history were often themselves religious, or at least profoundly pro-religion, not because they believed in dogma, but because they recognized the inherent, perhaps even divinely ordained limits of human reason and our capacity to truly understand and control complex reality.
This is a direct hit at modern corporate culture's pervasive love affair with strategic planning.
Oh, definitely.
The sources claim there is no evidence that strategic planning works, and even, quite dramatically, evidence against it.
The critique is sharp. Management scholar William Starbuck, among others, has reportedly debunked the effectiveness of planning in rigorous academic studies.
Debunked it, not just questioned it.
That's the claim. The fundamental problem, according to our sources, is that strategic planning makes the corporation option blind, trapping them in non-opportunistic courses of action. It creates a tunnel vision that prevents them from adapting to the inevitable shifts and unforeseen opportunities that arise.
So it sounds like management theory, particularly its obsession with planning, is being called out as little more than pseudoscience.
Pretty much. Matthew Stewart's Management Myth and Abramson and Friedman's A Perfect Mess are cited as works that thoroughly debunk these commonly held, yet empirically unsupported approaches.
So the conclusion is,
Strategic planning is bluntly described as just superstitious. It provides a comforting illusion of control and foresight, but in reality, it hinders genuine opportunism, flexibility, and the ability to capitalize on the unpredictable nature of complex systems. It's a ritual, not a strategy.
this brings us to a truly central and often misunderstood concept in the sources, what's called the inverse turkey problem. It's essentially about seeing what you don't see.
Right, the hidden information.
It delves into the epistemology of statistical statements, particularly how the unknown can hold significant good or bad news, especially when we're operating in what was termed extremism territory, where rare, extreme events, not averages, dominate outcomes.
The fundamental principle at play here is evidence of absence is not absence of evidence.
Say that again?
Evidence of absence is not absence of evidence.
Mhm.
Just because you haven't seen something doesn't mean it doesn't exist or won't happen.
Okay, got it.
This is critically important because it means that just because you haven't observed something in the past doesn't mean it won't happen or that it isn't profoundly impactful. This has crucial divergent implications depending on the system's fragility or antifragility.
Fragile versus antifragile.
For antifragile systems, good news tends to be absent from past data. The truly positive rare events, the massive breakthroughs, the exponential payoffs, are precisely what you won't see in your limited historical sample. They're hidden.
So the good stuff is hidden if you're antifragile. What about fragile?
For fragile systems, it's the bad news that doesn't show easily. The catastrophic negative rare events, the black swans, are hidden from past data, giving a deceptively rosier, safer picture than reality. It's like looking at a perfectly calm ocean and assuming there are no tsunamis.
Until one hits.
Exactly. The Carlos Slim example beautifully illustrates this for the anti-fragile side, the hidden good news.
Carlos Slim, the billionaire.
Right. Imagine trying to estimate the average wealth in Mexico by randomly sampling a few thousand people. Without including Carlos Slim, you would massively underestimate the total wealth of the country. He is famously richer than the bottom 70 to 90 million Mexicans combined.
Wow, one person skews everything.
His single extreme data point completely skews the aggregate.
And this mirrors the payoff from trial and error, particularly the blind funding strategy we discussed earlier.
Precisely. You might incur a lot of small, visible losses, but then once in a while you find something rather significant, a Carlos Slim of an invention or a discovery. But from the outside, that methodology will show nasty attributes because it hides its qualities, not its defects. It looks like a lot of failures, but the few wins are so enormous they compensate for everything.
So the track record looks bad, but the potential is huge and hidden.
Yes, in the anti-fragile case, the sample track record will tend to underestimate the long-term average. by hiding the massive positive outliers. This is the inverse turkey problem.
And the regular turkey problem.
Whereas in the classic turkey problem, which applies to fragile systems with hidden bad news, the sample track record will tend to underestimate the long-term average by hiding defects and displaying only qualities, giving you a much rosier picture than reality right before catastrophe strikes. Like the turkey fed every day until Thanksgiving.
Right, things look great until they suddenly aren't.
Yeah.
So the sources are incredibly critical of conventional statistics and those who teach it, especially at elite institutions, for fundamentally getting the turkey problem and its inverse wrong.
Very critical.
They specifically call out Harvard Business School professors, implying they might have less real-world understanding than, say, a taxi driver.
The criticism is indeed pointed. Let's look at Gary Pisano, a Harvard Business School professor who concluded that most biotech companies earn no profit, and used this to suggest pitiful potential for the industry.
Okay, so most aren't profitable. Seems reasonable to be cautious.
But what was his fundamental error, according to our sources? He made the elementary inverse turkey mistake. He failed to realize that in a business with limited losses and unlimited potential, precisely a power law distribution, the significant hidden positives are simply missed in past average data.
Because the average company makes nothing, but one or two make billions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In the extremist, Dan, it's true that most companies make no profit. The rare event dominates, and a small number of companies generate all the shekels.
Oh.
You can't judge the forest by looking only at the average tree.
And the danger of this thinking.
And the danger of this type of linear thinking, this mistake, is that it inhibits everything economic life that has antifragile properties. It makes potentially antifragile industries fragile by favoring matters that are sure bets, steering investment away from the very areas where explosive game-changing returns truly lie.
Okay, that makes sense. You missed the moonshots because you're looking at the average.
Precisely.
And another Harvard professor, Kenneth Fruit, made a similar mistake, but in the opposite direction, applied to fragile systems.
Right, with reinsurance.
He looked at reinsurance companies, which insure against catastrophic events, and thought they made too much profit given the risk they took. He reasoned that catastrophes seemed to occur less often than what was reflected in the data, so their profit margins seemed excessive.
But his error was profound. He missed the point that catastrophic events hits only negatively and tends to be absent from past data.
The turkey problem again. The bad stuff is hidden.
Yes. These rare, devastating events, by their very nature, don't show up often in historical samples. The asbestos liability example is chilling. One single episode bankrupted families of Lloyd underwriters. One rare negative event wiped out generations of wealth. This is the turkey problem at its most dangerous.
It's just like the anecdote about the construction manager who never wore a helmet for 25 years and nothing bad ever happened.
Right, the absence of evidence.
So someone using linear thinking would conclude helmets are unnecessary, it's perfectly safe. But as the source puts it, one instance and your entire generation will go off.
Exactly. This highlights the critical difference between linear, probabilistic thinking and true randomness, where rare, high-impact events dominate.
So given this understanding of hidden data and the power of rare events, what are the practical rules for navigating this inherent uncertainty for both individuals and organizations?
Our sources offer 3 critical rules. First, look for optionality.
Optionality, meaning?
This means actively seeking out opportunities where your downside is limited, but your upside is potentially unlimited. Rank things by optionality, prioritizing open-ended, not closed-ended payoffs.
Okay, limited loss, unlimited gain. Rule 2.
Second, invest in people, not business plans. Bet on the jockey, not the horse.
We heard that with the VCs.
Exactly. Look for someone capable of changing 6 or 7 times over his career or more. Someone truly adaptable, and an idea that is part of Motors open, meaning it has inherent optionality and can evolve. This makes you immune from the backfit narrative of the business plan and is inherently more robust to an unpredictable world.
And the third rule?
And finally, the third rule is to be barbelled.
Barbelled, like a weightlifting bar.
Exactly like that. This is a powerful strategy, implying extreme diversification on one end, making many small, low-risk, high-optionality bets, and extreme safety on the other, meticulously preserving your core capital. You put maybe 80–90% of your resources in extremely safe, low-risk assets, and the remaining 10–20% in highly speculative, high-reward ventures.
So super safe on one side, super risky on the other, nothing in the middle.
Precisely. This strategy allows you to benefit from positive rare events while being robustly protected against negative ones. It's about combining extreme caution with extreme risk-taking, rather than moderate fragile risks, which often hide their dangers.
This brings us to lessons in disorder, the profound power of self-directed learning, and the critical importance of challenging conventional wisdom, especially in education.
Yeah, this part is really fascinating.
Our sources highlight a pervasive ingratitude towards many who have helped us get there by consistently misunderstanding convex tinkering and antifragility. Our institutions, though perhaps not consciously, have somehow managed to weave randomness and antifragility into their fabric, often despite themselves.
And critically, history has largely been written by formal thinkers and theorizing theorizers who operate under the implicit, often unstated belief that reasoning has a monopoly on knowledge production.
The academics, the theorists.
Right. In this narrative, empirics or empirical skeptics, those who relied on experiment and experience, on trial and error, the tinkerers, were often dismissed as charlatans.
That's a fascinating historical injustice. The very word empiric itself, referring to someone who relied on trial and error and tinker, was used disparagingly, considered inferior professionally, socially, and intellectually.
Wow.
Official medicine, for instance, often saw itself as having to compete with crowds of flashy showmen, mountebanks, sorcerers, all manner of unlicensed practitioners.
And these unlicensed practitioners included many doctors who didn't rigidly follow the dominant Greco-Arabic school of rational medicine, which ironically based its authority largely on Aristotle and Galen, both of whom abhorred experience.
They didn't like real-world experience.
Apparently not as much as theory. It seems economic motivations played a significant role too, as the regulation of medicine corresponds to worries about the empirics for economic reasons as competition made their income drop. They were often bundled with thieves in the public imagination, seen as a threat to established practitioners.
And here's the profound irony. Mainstream doctors were often silently copying some of the remedies and cures developed and promoted by others for economic reasons.
So they copied the charlatans.
Quietly, yes. They quietly benefited from the collective trial and error of others, incorporating cures that are now integrated into medicine. The sources urge us to pause, take a minute, and pay some respect. Consider our ingratitude to those who caught us here, the uncredited tinkerers who stumbled upon what truly worked.
It's a powerful call to humility, recognizing that much of what we consider established knowledge today originated from messy, unplanned, and often scorned trial and error processes.
Now let's talk about what the sources term the ludic fallacy, the crucial distinction and often false assumption about classroom versus real-world skills.
Ah yes, the game versus reality.
Our sources define two distinct domains. The ludic, which is game-like with explicit known rules like chess or a formal classroom exam, and then there's the ecological, which is real life, where rules are often unknown, fluid, and variables cannot be isolated or controlled.
The ludic fallacy is the mistaken belief in transferability of skills from one domain to the other.
So being good at the game doesn't mean you're good at life.
Essentially, yes. For example, there's no evidence whatsoever that exceptional chess abilities lead to better reasoning off the chessboard in complex, real-world scenarios. Skills in complex domains are highly domain-specific.
This is truly wild. Doctoral research cited in the sources showed children's ability to count degrades right after they were taught arithmetic.
Degrades. It gets worse.
Apparently. When asked a simple problem about the number of intervals between 15 poles, those who didn't know arithmetic often answered correctly, 14 intervals, while those who had studied it often made mistakes, 15 poles, counting the poles themselves. Formal teaching seemed to actively get in the way of intuitive understanding.
Wow. That's quite something.
And this ties into biologist E.O. Wilson's poignant observation about soccer moms, referring to the phenomenon of overscheduled, overstructured childhoods driven by a desire to optimize every minute.
Right. Trying to engineer childhood.
Wilson identified this as a significant hindrance to true child development. The sources argue that soccer moms try to eliminate the trial and error and anti-fragility from the children's life, move them away from the ecological, and transform them into nerds working on pre-existing maps of reality.
Ouch. That's harsh, but I see the point.
And the consequence is that these good students who excel in structured environments become totally untrained to handle ambiguity.
They can't cope when there isn't a clear answer or path.
So the argument is that you can be an intellectual without being a nerd, Someone who learns deeply with a private library instead of a classroom and spends time as an aimless but rational flair, wandering, observing, and learning spontaneously.
The sources insist that we need randomness, adventures, uncertainty, self-discovery, near-traumatic episodes, because these are the very elements that make life worth living, unlike the structured, fake, and ineffective life of an empty suit CEO with a preset schedule.
So embrace the
To
chaos.
some extent, yes. Modernity, they argue, tries to squeeze every drop of variability and randomness out of their lives. This echoes Seneca's ancient wisdom, which they quote, "We do not study for life, but only for the lecture room," a saying they note has been corrupted by many colleges and educational systems.
This all resonates profoundly with the author's own autobiographical vignette, where he describes himself as a barbell autodidact.
Right, applying the barbell to learning.
Despite acquiring degrees, he considers himself a pure autodidact, inherently skeptical of standardized formal learning.
His father, despite being a national valedictorian himself, a truly intelligent student, did not overvalue school education.
Even though he was top of the class.
Yeah. He realized, through his own observations, that intelligent students were unable to understand certain fundamental, real-world things, that some blindness came with the package of hyper-specialized curriculum-based learning. This realization profoundly influenced the author's path.
And the author describes how he learned in trading rooms to select people not just on academic smarts, but on their ability to integrate socially while sitting around doing nothing and enjoying fuzziness.
Enjoying fuzziness.
Yeah, he selected people based on their ability to hang around, to tolerate ambiguity and unstructured time. He notes that studious, highly academic people were often not good at this. They needed a clear task, a specific problem to solve.
At a remarkably young age 10, the author realized that good grades, while superficially desirable, carried significant side effects, an intellectual sacrifice in terms of independent thought and deep learning.
An intellectual sacrifice.
His father even hinted at this. And, in a surprising anecdotal turn, his father's classmate, who was at the exact bottom of his class, became a self-made merchant, by far the most successful person in his class.
The bottom of the class became the most successful.
By far, apparently. Another classmate made a killing buying wood in Africa and retired before 40, both having thrived outside traditional academic measures of success.
So he clearly contrasts what he calls anti-students, persons of true knowledge who learn broadly and independently, with swallowers, those whose knowledge is only derived from curriculum.
Swallowers, like
Yeah.
just taking it in without digesting it.
Kind of. The author realized that the real edge, the truly valuable insights, lay in exactly what lay outside the official academic program.
This point is powerfully illustrated by his gym strength versus street fight strength analogy.
Oh, okay.
People who build impressive physiques on modern, expensive gym machines often look incredibly strong, but they might fail to lift a stone with practical utility or get completely hammered in a street fight by someone trained in more disorderly settings.
So gym muscles aren't real-world strong.
Their strength, he argues, is extremely domain-specific and doesn't exist outside organized constructs. He applies this to over-specialized athletes and even top-most musicians, actors, in their highly specific domains. They're brilliant there, but maybe not elsewhere.
And he extends this critique to economists specializing in risk and probability, noting how they would often fall apart slightly outside their narrow focus, but within the discipline of probability itself.
They couldn't handle slight variations from the textbook cases.
Exactly. They could only solve problems that perfectly matched the academic models they had learned.
The author describes his own barbell autodidactism as a deliberate strategy. He studied the exact minimum necessary to pass school, just enough to get by.
Minimum effort for school.
But then he read voraciously wholesale, diving deep into humanities, then math and science, then history always, outside a curriculum, away from a gym machine. This broad, self-directed learning was his true education.
He even found a way to leverage what people later pathologize as ADHD, using natural simulation as a main driver to scholarship. He believed learning needed to be totally effortless. If he got bored with a specific book or subject, he'd simply move to another, rather than giving up reading entirely.
So follow the interest, not the syllabus.
Right. The trick, he notes, is to be bored with a specific book rather than with the act of reading itself.
His parents' unlimited bookstore account revealed to him the shelves of the library and the narrow school material. This stark contrast made him realize that School was a plot designed to deprive people of education by squeezing their knowledge into a narrow set of authors and predefined subjects.
School as a plot to deprive people of education, that's strong.
It's provocative, yeah.
From age 13, he rigorously kept a log of his reading hours, aiming for 30 to 60 a week, and proudly states he managed to read nothing that was prescribed by schools.
Wow, 30 to 60 hours a week, just reading what he wanted.
Then, in his 20s, an obsession took control for probability and randomness. He smelled some flaws with statistical stuff that the professors could not explain, brushing them away as irrelevant.
And this was his critical insight. What the professors brushed away had to be the meat.
The important stuff was what they ignored.
He then ordered almost every book with probability or stochastic in its title, and for a couple of years, no course material, no newspaper, no literature, nothing else. He jumped from one book to the next when stuck or bored, following his own intellectual curiosity wherever it led.
The payoff, he recounts, was immense. 5 years later, he was set for life and making original research on small probability events.
So the unstructured approach worked. Big time.
He firmly believes that if he had studied it by prepackaged means, he would have been brainwashed into thinking that uncertainty was something to be found in casinos and would have missed its profound, ubiquitous presence in the real world.
Right. Limiting it to games instead of seeing it everywhere.
He passionately advocates for non-nerdy applied mathematics. Find a problem first and figure out the math that works for it, rather than study in a vacuum through theorems and artificial examples, then change reality to make it look like these examples.
Problem first, math second, not the other way around.
And he quotes a famous speculator who once told him, "Much of what other people know isn't worth knowing."
Oof.
The author's instinct, honed through this self-directed journey, remains that the treasure is what lies outside the corpus, as far as if from the center as possible, and following one's own direction in the selection of readings. As he powerfully concludes, "What I was given to study in school, I have forgotten. What I've decided to read my own, I still remember."
That says a lot, doesn't it?
We've just navigated a truly counterintuitive landscape where the most robust and significant outcomes often emerge not from rigid planning, but from the unexpected.
Yeah, a real mind bender in some ways.
Yeah. We've seen how teleological approaches can be profoundly counterproductive, and how true expertise and deep insight are frequently found far beyond the confines of conventional wisdom and structured systems.
Right.
We've explored how governments stumble into innovation, how businesses drift into unforeseen successes, and most powerfully, how individuals flourish through a barbell approach to learning, embracing randomness, optionality, and fierce intellectual independence.
So what does this all mean for you, our listener? It means profoundly rethinking what informed truly looks like. It's not simply about diligently acquiring what you're told to know, but about cultivating an openness to what you weren't looking for.
Being open to the accidents.
Exactly. It's about developing the wisdom to spot the hidden jockeys in any field, recognizing the inherent limits of tidy plans, and appreciating the surprising, often explosive, power of chaos and emergent order.
If the most valuable knowledge often lies hidden outside the official curriculum, the carefully constructed business plan, or the direct, linear path of research, then what unexpected detours in your own life might hold the greatest opportunities and insights that you haven't yet recognized or valued?
That's the question, isn't it?
Perhaps true wisdom isn't about accumulating more facts or following more prescribed steps, but about strategically not knowing and learning to let serendipity and optionality be your most profound guides.